Hey, y'all, welcome back to part one of our Bible story series. So, in this part, we're going to be looking at the setting all the way through the plan of action of the Bible. So, we looked at all the different elements of story, and now we're going to be looking at the Bible and plugging in to each of those pieces how the Bible fits, how the plot is moving throughout the narrative of Scripture. And so, first, we're going to look at the setting. Now, the Bible is pretty easy in this regards because the opening statement is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So you have a when, you have a who, you have a what, and you have a where. And so right off the bat, we're introduced to the main character, your hero, the protagonist, and it's God. And he created the heavens and the earth. And he created man and woman, and he put man and woman in that earth in the Garden of Eden to rule on his behalf. In other words, God created man and woman in his own image. What that means is God created man and woman to represent his character on the earth. They are going to stand in as rulers on behalf of God. And now, when you're reading a story and you're seeing that God created man and woman to rule in his image, according to his character, you have to ask yourself, well, what is God's character like? Well, the rest of the story reveals that. But to kind of speed it along, you can go to Exodus 34:6. In Exodus 34, there's a statement about God that describes exactly what God's character is like. God is compassionate. God is merciful. God is slow to anger, and he's abounding in steadfast love. These are the character traits of God. And so when he created man and woman in his image to rule according to his character, this is how they are to rule. They're to rule with mercy. This is what it means that they're going to be image bearers. In other words, they are going to reflect God's character. And they're going to rule like that. And so they're placed in the garden with the tree of life, but yet they were given one rule. Don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If you do, you will die. So we have this instruction on God's behalf. God says, you're going to rule in my image, according to my character, according to mercy and sacrificial love. And on the other end, on the negative end, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, as we get to the end of the story of the Bible, remember we said in our first video how the end often reflects the beginning. So man and woman start out in the garden with the tree of life, and they're going to rule according to God's image. We haven't found out if that happened yet, but you get to the end of the book of Revelation, all the way at the end of the Bible, and we see something pretty cool. We see man and woman in the garden with the tree of life, and it says they will rule forever. So if that was all you had, you just had God saying, okay, man and woman, I'm putting you in the garden to rule on my behalf in my image. And then the next statement was, and they're in the garden and they're ruled forever. That's not really a very good story. It's cool, it's exciting that it happened, I guess, but it doesn't make for a good narrative. So what happens is, as we said before, there's an antagonist that enters the scene and introduces conflict. And the Bible is no different. So in comes the antagonist in the story of the Bible, who we all know as Satan. But in Genesis, he comes in as a serpent. He comes into the garden where Adam and Eve are supposed to be ruling on God's behalf. And he comes into the garden and he deceives God's rulers, the man and the woman. He deceives them into not ruling for God, but ruling for him instead. Remember, the antagonist is diametrically opposed to the protagonist. And so when God says to Adam and Eve, you shall not eat of the tree or you will die, Satan says the exact opposite. He says, God knows, when you eat of the tree, you will not die, but you will become like God. And so he introduces himself as totally opposite of God. On one hand, he says, you won't die, when God says you will die. On the other hand, if God's character is sacrificial love and mercy, Satan wants Adam and Eve to become their own gods, and so he reveals that his character is selfish ambition. And so we have two characters that are totally opposite of one another, and there's suddenly a tension. That tension comes into a problem. Man and woman obey the serpent. They listen to the serpent instead of the voice of God. And they end up eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which introduces a problem, because no longer are God's man and woman ruling in the image of God, according to his purposes and his character, but rather they're now ruling in the image of the serpent. They're ruling with selfish ambition and pride, and they have eaten of the tree. And so now you're kind of asking yourself, well, are they going to die? And so Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden with the assumption that, yes, they will die because they no longer have access to the tree of life. And so man is no longer ruling in God's image, but in Satan's image, and is now characterized by selfish ambition rather than sacrifice and mercy. So, not only that, but now we've entered into the curse of death. Man and woman are no longer in the garden. They're no longer with the tree of life, and so they're walking towards death. In other words, they're dead men walking. So now we have a tension, we have a problem between the protagonist and antagonist, and now the protagonist has to state his plan of action. The protagonist has to tell us how he's going to fix this grand problem that the antagonist has introduced. We get this in Genesis 3, verses 15 and 16, where God says to the serpent, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. And they will have enmity. They will be enemies with one another. But he also says to the serpent, you will strike him, the woman's seed, and the woman's seed will strike him back. And so we have this dual striking. They're going to be at odds with one another, and ultimately they're going to kill one another is the implication here. But that's not the end. Because in Genesis 3:16, we're told that this seed of the woman, is going to come through and he's going to rule. He's going to rule like the old Adam couldn't. And so we get this phrase that develops throughout Scripture called the new Adam. This new ruler, this is God's solution to the problem. See, the old Adam couldn't do it. And instead of killing Adam and Eve right there in the garden when they disobeyed, he gave them mercy. And he says, you know what, I'm going to provide a new Adam. I'm going to provide a substitute for you who is going to rule according to God's image, perfectly like the old Adam didn't. Not only that, but he's going to fix the curse. So God's solution to the problem of death and the problem that his man and woman are not ruling is he's going to provide a new ruler who is going to reverse the curse of death. And so now we get to watch God as he implements this plan into action, which will be our next couple videos.